What's happening? Riot Starter TV's in the building. It's been a few minutes. You know what I mean? I know that you know that we've been busy over here at Black Power Media with the Remix Morning Show, Renegade Culture, and a whole lot of other stuff out in these streets organizing and, you know, getting ready for revolution, as they would say. I'm your host, KalonjiChanga. And today, like every time you see us, we have a special guest. Today is a serious day in the movement. A lot of folks we've lost, but you know we still keeping it moving. So I wanted to bring on someone that can give us some clarity and some updates and some information regarding our current People's Liberation Movement, and we're gonna touch on a little bit of the past. Our guest today is Dr. Johanna Fernandez. For those of you who are unaware, Dr. Johanna Fernandez is an associate professor in the Department of History at Baruch College. She's authored The Young Lords of Radical History, and she's one of the main spokespersons when it comes to the campaign to bring Mumia home. So we've been playing phone tag or social media tag or whatever kind of tag, you know what I mean, in order to try to make this thing happen. And today we got it just for you. So I want to bring on Dr. Johanna Fernandez. What's happening? How you doing?
Thanks for the invitation, and my apologies for the phone tag, but we're going to keep it moving, as you said.
No doubt. It's cool. We know you out there working. If you wasn't doing no work, then we'll talk bad about you. You know what I'm saying? I'll call you all kinds of names, talk about your third cousin removed and the whole nine. But today, you know what I mean? We know that you've been putting in some work or whatever. You know, I know you you know, a lot on your plate. I know you've been working with MOVE, you've been working with Mumia, and just earlier, late yesterday, we got the news that one of the MOVE members, Consuewella Africa, who was a survivor in the August 8th, 1978 attack on MOVE, and who later lost her children, Netta and Tree Africa, in the May 13th, 1985 bombing of MOVE. We know that she's a former political prisoner. And, you know, most recently, the University of Pennsylvania, we found out that they held, they've been having, doing something with the remains of Tree and other MOVE survivors. So we want to touch base on Consuewella. Can you speak to Consuewella and who she is, who she was, and her legacy and what's going on right now?
Well, Consuewella Africa is a member of the MOVE organization, persecuted in Philadelphia for decades for their unrepentant, unconciliatory disposition toward the state, the police, and white supremacy. They've been fighting since the late 60s and early 70s. Consuewella, as you said, is a political prisoner. She spent 16 years in prison, in part because she failed to renounce her membership in the MOVE organization. And her two children, Tree and Netta Africa, were killed in the MOVE bombing of 1985. And Tree is one of the children whose remains were passed back and forth between Princeton University and UPenn by anthropologists in forensics class. that they named, I can't even remember what they named the class, but it was like Adventures in Forensic Science. This was the title of the class at Princeton, and they were literally using the bones of Black children for decades now. This is one of her children, Tree. And she had been hospitalized for 2 weeks, actually, since she found out about this. She fell ill. And you can imagine how unforgiving and devastating to know that your child's remains were being used, desecrated, by 2 universities, elite universities in this country. I can't imagine what that does to a mother.
I think that, when we talk about cases like this, people look at it from a like it's a, it's just a foreign situation. But you have to put it in perspective, and when you say your children, you know what I mean? Because of the fact that oftentimes we're desensitized from, mass media, we desensitized from, what's going on in the capitalist society. So we just, we almost, oh man, that's terrible. But it's not an impact if it's not us directly. You know what I mean? I'm trying to think if it was her I saw in the press conference. We had Pam on a few weeks ago on our morning show. But I think it was Consuela that said that when she was locked up, they came to her and said that your child was killed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that was not Consuela. That was
okay.
Consuela. It was one of the other members.
Okay.
But yeah, I buried my father 2 years ago. And when you bury your loved ones, your children or your parents, your siblings, you develop a new spirit, a new head, and a new reverence for life and for the dead. And maybe had I not experienced that already, I might not understand the gravity of the situation. But no, that's not true. Like, part of what distinguishes human beings, they say, from other forms of life is our rituals and ceremonies at death. This is what defines us.
Indeed.
As human beings. One of the things that defines us is that we have always adhered to a certain kind of reverence upon the passing of other human beings, of our family. And this just gives us a sense, this kind of desecration and violation of that which is most human when it comes to Black people and the bodies of Black people, gives us a window into the barbarism of white supremacy of this country, and the ways in which racism disfigures the humanity of the oppressor, right? And this is Black life that's desecrated over and over and over and over again. I don't think that this can be remedied, really, within the confines of this existing system. I mean, this is why a complete restructuring and reordering of society is necessary, because this kind of deep barbarism doesn't get overturned with legislation or the signing of a law that will make Juneteenth a national holiday. I don't know if you heard that the Senate approved.
Yeah. I mean, I heard that. I heard that bullshit. I mean, here it is. To me, the interpretation is we now sanction and allow you to celebrate your freedom. You know what I mean?
Which we've been celebrating since 1865,
yeah.
right?
So we need our former slavers, captors, to tell us that it is now okay, basically, to commercialize this and turn it into another capitalist production, because that's what's going on right now. We haven't heard so much about Juneteenth since the history of Juneteenth. Now you have Juneteenth strip clubs, Juneteenth car washes, Juneteenth at the bar, taking shots at the bar, so on and so forth. You know, and you know, to me, do your thing, however you feel. But you know, for those who unite with that, I think that you should think about the possibility of being guilty of ancestral treason, because of the fact that you are allowing these folks to dictate your reality still. One of the main things we demand is self-determination. You can't get self-determination when you have to seek the approval, you know what I'm saying, of your captor. I mean, that makes no sense. I mean, so to me, I think that any African or any indigenous person who would even go along with that, you know, should kind of get their heads checked. You know, you use the word barbarism, and I don't even know if barbarism is a deeply enough rooted term for folks to even understand how diabolical these people are. You know, I was on a radio interview recently, and white dude asked me, "Is the white man the devil?" And I said, "No. I mean, I don't think the white man is the devil." I said, honestly, I don't think the devil got anything on this white man. You know what I'm saying? The devil's overrated when it comes to white supremacy, when it comes to imperialism. The devil is an invention to throw us off from what the hell you're doing. You know, but you know, what is the current state in regards to Consuewella, because of the fact that we know that, you know, she had to relive that situation. You're thinking that perhaps your child may be buried somewhere, but all of a sudden you learn through a third party, through an article, I believe, that, you know, your child has been used just like they do when they place, you know, our ancestors in museums to be looked at and prodded and admired. You know what I mean? Treated like animals in the zoo. I mean, what? And then, you know, like I said, reliving it, and now she's gone. She's an ancestor. What's going on right now? Are there any plans or whatever that you know of, or?
You know, I'm just thinking that these people are tomb raiders. They're words really can't capture the depravity, the horror, the abuse, the terror, the monsters that they are. But we are waiting to hear what the when the services are going to happen. We don't know yet. You can imagine that the Move family is just reliving May 13th, and the children, right? And the children who are now adults who lived through this, right? The surviving children of Move, those wounds and that trauma that likely was never really dealt with, tackled, is now open again. And they are in the process of negotiating and meeting with the establishment of Philadelphia to make right on this horror show. So it's one thing over the on top of the other. So we don't know, but we stand with Move, and you stand with MOVE.
Absolutely.
People of conscience stand with MOVE, and we send them love and deep condolences and our commitment to fight.
No doubt, no doubt. You know, and it's crazy because for a second, you know, the state will confuse you. You know, capitalism lies all the time. You know, even when it, as Kwame Ture said, even when it tells the truth, it's a result of a double lie. For a minute, we were like, yeah, you know, some of the Move 9, they're being released slowly but surely.
Right.
You know what I mean? So these are things for folks like us who've been fighting for the rights of political prisoners. There were times that that it was few and far between that any of the PPs were being released. And then all of a sudden, you know, it seems like, you know, they started coming home. So it's like, to me, it's like whenever the state gives you one thing, they take away something else. You know what I mean? You know, these if it's not the police unions, it's some of these other henchmen and monsters, as you say. Speaking of MOVE, you know, I want to touch on Mumia. The last time we were in the same online space, we were talking about Mumia's conditions. I think it was you, Bob Doyle, and Jared Ball and myself. We were talking about, I think he had just had his heart surgery or whatever. What's the current condition with Mumia, and what can people do?
So Mumia had open heart surgery. I think it's important to just say that, because heart surgery, there are all kinds of different heart surgeries, but he had open heart surgery. And I kind of knew this, but not really. You know that when you have open heart surgery, they literally remove your heart from your body and then put it back in. So I want people to sit with that. He was misdiagnosed with congestive heart failure, but the problem was really that 3 of his arteries were clogged. Thanks to a prisoner with whom Mumia was walking a number of weeks ago in Yard, who turned to him and said, "Brother, I've had a number of heart attacks and survived. You need to get your tail immediately to the infirmary and ultimately to the hospital, because everything you're telling me suggests that you could have a heart attack any moment now." And sure enough, we keep us safe. We keep us safe. So it was a prisoner who diagnosed Mumia. After he had been in the hospital with COVID, diagnosed with congestive heart failure, it was finally a prisoner who was like, "Brother, there's something going on here. And it sounds like a heart attack on a platter. Go now." And Mumia went. He is better. He's better. He experienced just a surge of energy immediately after the surgery. But Mumia has had anemia for apparently decades while in prison. So he's having some problems with anemia. You know, Mumia is a fighter. He's a survivor. He doesn't complain. He's back to working on his PhD program. He's in a PhD program. And we need to bring him home. And we need to bring our other political prisoners home. Russell Murren Schultz,
Absolutely,
who has stage 4 cancer in a Pennsylvania dungeon. Political prisoner.
This is insane. We got Sundiata, 84 years old. 84 years old. And
experiencing dementia.
I mean, and they don't care. I mean, right. and it's because of the fact that folks are fighting on the outside that brothers and sisters are even getting any care at all. You know what I mean? So
absolutely. Yeah. And you know what? You mentioned Sundiata Kohli, who's 84. Mumia's doctor, Ricardo Alvarez, has said over and over again that what we're seeing in the prisons is elder abuse. It's an abuse of elderly people.
Legal.
And I've written about this. Prisons in America today are old people's homes for people of color.
That's right.
They were imprisoned in the 80s and 90s. They got draconian sentences. And now they're aging. And so American prisons are old people's homes for people of color.
That's right. And being punished, and like you said, just like the quote unquote old folks homes, abuse that goes on.
Right.
Yeah. The abuse that's going on out here is the same thing that's going on in there. I mean, at least here, you can check on your family members. You can make some demands. In there, at times they get lost. So we're grateful that folks like Jalil Muttaqin made it out, in good health. We're grateful that folks like Herman Bell made it out, in good health, and the Darubas and the Sekou, so on and so forth. And, we pray that they all, as we call for, that chant of free them all, we pray that they all come out unscathed, MOVE is just such I can't say it any other way, just such a fucking incredibly, amazingly strong family. You know what I'm saying? As far as an organization, as a family unit, just all of the suffering, all of the pain, the nonstop fight from the Move 9 to Ramona fighting through her situation. I mean, it's always something, and they're never giving up. You know what I'm saying? You'll always see Pam out there in the front line. You'll always see, all of the Move children, the Mike Juniors, and all of them out there still fighting until there's victory. And that's something that MOVE should be. When you talk about revolutionary fronts, when you mention the Black Panther Party, you know what I mean? When you mention SNCC, groups like MOVE and RAM and, the Young Lords should be held up. I want to shift a little bit. I know that you wrote a book dealing with the Young Lords, and, we've had Felipe on our other podcast, Renegade Coach. Of course, Felipe is wild like the Taliban. You know what I mean? So, good health to Felipe. I heard he was going through some things himself.
Right.
But another soldier. For folks who are unaware, because of the fact that we take for granted when we're dealing with our people's liberation struggle and movement, we take for granted that we use certain terms. We talk about COINTELPRO, we talk about political prisoners. We name these names as if everybody that hears this podcast or sees this podcast is going to know what we're talking about. I think that the Young Lords is one of those groups who are like unsung heroes. You know what I mean? And I want to speak a little bit on the history of the Young Lords, if you don't mind. Tell us about the Young Lords. Who is the Young Lord Party?
So the Young Lords are the Puerto Rican counterpart of the Black Panther Party. They emerged in Chicago in 1969 as a reformed gang. The leader of the gang of Puerto Rican and Mexican youth was Chacha Jimenez. Chacha Jimenez was imprisoned during the 60s, radicalized in prison, read the autobiography of Malcolm X, Seven Story Mountain, the book by Thomas Merton, and Where Do We Go From Here by Martin Luther King. This is during the rebellions in the aftermath of the assassination of MLK in 1968. He's imprisoned while all that is happening, and people are being railroaded into the prisons. The rioters, the so-called rioters, are coming into the prisons. He has a moment of consciousness, and I talk about this transformation of gang leader into revolutionary in the first chapter of my book. It is an epic story. He leaves prison and decides that he's going to turn the organization into the gang into a political organization. And eventually he meets Fred Hampton. And what folks don't know is that the existence of the Young Lords in a process of radicalization is what, for Fred Hampton and other members of the Chicago Black Panther Party, clinches the deal for the creation of the Rainbow Coalition, which is a coalition of poor people, including Black Americans, Puerto Ricans and Mexicans in the Young Lords organization, and poor whites from Appalachia in the Young Patriots. So they're organizing around displacement, urban renewal, which is what they call the gentrification project of that period, against police brutality. One of the members of the Young Lords is killed by the cops. And it's a coming together of a series of unintended developments, or unintended, developments that leads to the radicalization of the gang. The killing of a Young Lord is one of them. And they argue and believe in the independence of Puerto Rico. Part of what the Young Lords do is that they amplify the United States quiet colonial project on the island of Puerto Rico. But ultimately, they emerge out of the urban crisis of the post-World War II period, the rise of deindustrialization. So we tend to think about deindustrialization as a problem affecting white working class people in America. But before deindustrialization hit white America, it actually disemboweled poor communities of color in urban centers, Puerto Rican and Black American, after World War II, in places like Detroit, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago. Deindustrialization creates permanent unemployment among a sector of the population in these cities, which were increasingly people of color. So the organization develops also in New York. It spreads to New York. And in New York, we have people like Felipe Luciano, who was part of the Last Poets, becomes the chairman of the organization. In New York, the organization is led by young students who've quit their colleges to build a movement, a revolutionary movement in their communities. And they end up, like the Black Panther Party, establishing breakfast programs. They do an enormous amount of work around health and childhood lead poisoning, for example. The Young Lords in New York occupy a church and transform it into a social service sanctuary for the poor. They create a clinic. They also occupy a hospital, Lincoln Hospital in the Bronx, to dramatize the horrific conditions of health under which both Black Americans and Puerto Ricans are being given healthcare or not. They address the issue of addiction, and alongside of members of the Black Panther Party, they create a drug addiction program that uses acupuncture to treat addiction. Mutulu Shakur, a political prisoner, was part of that project in the early 1970s. And at Lincoln Hospital, this is all happening at Lincoln Hospital. At Lincoln Hospital, the Young Lords, in collaboration with workers at the hospital, but also doctors and nurses and medical technicians draft the first known patient Bill of Rights, something that we take for granted today here in the United States and around the world. I'll just end this bit by saying that they were self-proclaimed revolutionary nationalists and socialists. So they believed that capitalism, like the Black Panthers, is the source of the oppression and exploitation of people of color and colonization, and that we need system change. One of the most incredible things about the Young Lords is that it's a Puerto Rican revolutionary nationalist organization, but approximately 25% of its membership is Black American. And this organization of Puerto Ricans is led by Black Puerto Ricans. So it's a Latino organization that's anti-capitalist, but that begins to theorize the ways in which white supremacy and racism manifests differently in Latin America under Spanish colonial rule. And they compare that to the ways in which white supremacy and racism emerges here domestically under British rule. And these are young people. These are very, very young people between the ages of 14 and maybe 25, 26, who begin to challenge internalized forms of racism among Puerto Ricans and other Latinos and make common cause with the most demeaned and hated Black Power era group in the United States, the Black Panther Party. And that's why we remember them today, because they were bold enough to make that connection. And part of what I argue in the book is that it actually took a gang, a Puerto Rican and Mexican gang, to throw down with the Black Panther Party, because, and I'll just say that migrants to America, and Puerto Ricans were migrants, migrating in larger numbers, for example, in New York City, than Black Americans in the post-World War II period. So Puerto Ricans are coming in larger numbers than Black Americans. A third of the people of the island of Puerto Rico are pushed out by US economic policy of the island. When migrants come to the United States, they learn immediately to distance themselves from Black Americans. Doesn't matter what migrant you are, from Africa, the Caribbean, Latin America, that's what you immediately taught. And you're already beleaguered. So yeah, you're going to be like, I'm Joe and I don't know. And we live together, but there's a certain distance. But Puerto Ricans, this migration, mass migration of people from Puerto Rico, pushed out by US imperialism from their homeland, they happened to migrate into the civil rights and Black Power movement. So their consciousness was transformed by this moment of great dreams. But ultimately, it took a gang of Puerto Ricans and Mexicans in Chicago to know that the Black Panthers were fighting their same enemy, the cops. So that's what I got to tell you about the Young Lords. There's so much more to say about the Young Lords in this book, but and what they did, their victories and the ways in which they fought the state and the cops in the streets. But that's just a flavor of the organization.
No doubt. I think you're lagging just a little bit, but we can hear you well. So that's the deal. What you saying about it taking a gang, you know, so many of the brothers and sisters that were even involved in the Black Panther Party or the BLA, they come out of these street organizations. You know what I'm saying? You got the Bunchy Carters over on the West Coast. You have the Darubas, who was a leader of a gang in New York. You know what I mean? And so many other brothers and sisters. And I think that that's one of the things that we experience, and it creates these divisions or whatever, because there's class struggle within movement. Another thing you spoke on, you know, that's very important. You talked about how when migrants come to the States, they're taught to not really rock with the black, the quote unquote Americans. I mean, the black folks who are in America. Let's say
Right.
that. And we witnessed that, you know, growing up in the tri-state area. They create divisions. The Jamaicans, between the Jamaicans and the Haitians, the Puerto Ricans and the Dominicans, the so on and so forth, and they play on our slight differences. They play on the colonies in which we came from. You know
Right.
what I mean? They play on the language barriers that you know, that we learned from, you know, whatever colonizer enslaved us. You know what I mean? So they use that as tools. But it's a beautiful thing to see the work that, you know, the Young Lords and Chairman Fred and all these others did with the Rainbow Coalition, which was eventually hijacked by Jesse Jackson, as folks know.
Right.
But you know, there's a few folks who came out of the Young Lord Party that people don't know that were involved in any type of movement, like Geraldo Rivera, for instance. You know, who would have thought that he came up out of a radical element, you know, so to
Well,
speak.
he was not a Young Lord. He was the lawyer. He defended the Young Lords in court.
Okay.
Which is a different, you know, ball of wax. But
Okay.
yes, but he was affiliated. And the question is, how do you go from defending this revolutionary organization associated with Black Power and end up on Fox News?
No doubt. So he was like the Bobby Rush of the Young Lord Party.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Being involved or around certain elements and still ended up on the wrong side of the tracks. I want to fast forward a little bit. You know, right now we have all these new uprisings. You have a lot of youth out here. And I think part of the difference between what we're seeing now and what we've experienced coming up in movement and struggle is, in my opinion, a lack of political education and a lack of proper study. You know what I mean? I think that coming up from my era, at least, you know, you sat at the feet of the elders, quote unquote. You studied and learned from the OGs. You didn't just go on the internet and say, "Hey, I'm going to be this today," and you know, I'm a revolutionary. You know what I mean? So we're seeing this difference in struggle, and I think that folks miss out on the fact that counterinsurgency is still alive and well. I want to talk about the Handschu Files.
Oh, really? Yeah.
If you could touch on that, because of the fact that it's a little known.
Listen, I mean, so the Handschu Files are the largest repository of police surveillance records in the country, including the police surveillance records of Malcolm X. How do we get the Handschu Files is the question. Like, okay, so how were 1 million records amassed? And how do we even know that they exist? Because this is not the kind of stuff that the police are like, hey, kids, here they are. We've been, you know, surveilling New Yorkers on a mass scale from 1954 to 1971. Here you go. So the question is, how do those files come to see the light of day? And a thing that folks know little about is the case of the Panther 21. Or they've heard of the Panther 21, but the details escape folks. So members of the Panther organization in the late 1960s were surveilled by the police in New York, and there was an attempt to entrap them, the Panther members. Literally, agents infiltrated the Panthers and made propositions to blow this up and, do this, that, and the third. The Panthers didn't bite the bait. Is that the term? Didn't take the bait.
Yeah.
Program. But 21 of them were imprisoned. What is fascinating is that they were imprisoned precisely at the moment when the workers they were working with at Lincoln Hospital, this is a year before the Young Lords emerge. The Black Panthers were working with the Lincoln Hospital Mental Health Center because the workers in that mental health center had taken over the facility and wanted to run the workplace in the interest of the people in the community. So this is a worker action. This is working class people saying, no, we're going to reorganize production in the interest of workers and the community. That's probably the most strategically radical action of the 60s. We're not talking about riots. We're not talking about organizing in the community. We're talking about people taking over the workplace, sure. Which is what socialists talk about all the time.
That's right.
We need to reorganize, not the socialists, the cookie cutter candy socialists that, we vote for. We're talking about vanguard revolutionary socialists.
That's right.
So the Black Panthers are literally engaged in political education. They're not, some of them might be workers, but they're mostly offering support work during this occupation and beginning the process of engaging in political education. Before you know it, the Panther 21 are arrested. Important. That's not a coincidence. So the incredible work that they're doing in the Bronx at a hospital goes to hell in the handbasket, and the Black Panther Party is demobilized through this kind of repression and the arrest of the entire party in New York. Okay, so the Panther 21 case, to defend them and to expose the ways in which they've been framed, or there has been an attempt to frame them, is the subject. It happens that, right? They're in court. This is the longest trial in the history of New York City. They are exonerated. But what ends up happening during the course of that trial is that all of this evidence of police surveillance and attempts at entrapment and police sending in agents into the party emerges during the trial. At the end of the trial, the lawyers who defended the Panther 21 decide that they are going to sue the NYPD for violating the Black Panther Party's First Amendment rights. The right, not of speech, but of association. This is really important. This is my new project, by the way. So the First Amendment litigation of a different epoch of the 19 teens and 20s happened again because of an enormous amount of government repression during World War I. During World War I, the American government arrested Eugene V. Debs, a socialist, for giving an anti-war speech. He spent a year in prison. And after the war, Eastern European immigrants, many of whom were socialists, were rounded up and their offices raided, and they were imprisoned, and many of them were deported. The ACLU emerges to challenge and sue the government for violation of the First Amendment and the right to free speech. Huge, because we tend to think that American democracy is about free speech. No, 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 no. It wasn't until people sued the government that free speech became associated with American freedom. And they sued the government because the American government was persecuting its radicals. Okay, so it is during the government repression and persecution of the Black Power movement and the Black Panthers in particular that we litigate the right of association, because it's free speech and association. And at the end of that trial, it's known as the Handschu trial, we win. Our lawyers, the lawyers of the left, of the Black revolutionaries, of the Black Panthers, win. And a judge, Judge Haight, literally, his name is Judge Charles Haight, I think his name is, says, well, we got a lot of records here of police surveillance. New Yorkers have the right to know the extent to which they were being surveilled and their rights were being violated by the NYPD. So these records need to be filed with the Municipal Archive of the City of New York for posterity, so people know of what the police is capable. He also says we need to circumscribe the power of the police. The police can't just go into a community and arrest people, or even follow them around. They need to get permission from a judge to do that. So those are known as the Handschu rules that attempt to circumscribe the power of the police in New York City. And so, boom, I come around in the 2014, after almost a decade of back and forth with the NYPD about these records. I want to see them because in them are the surveillance records of the young lords.
Sure.
So I am literally in a conversation with the NYPD for 10 years. And one day I wake up and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm from New York. Why don't I just go to One Police Plaza and have a conversation with these people and, tell them what's up? Why are we in this prolonged conversation about records that should be available to the public? I literally walk in. They are like, oh yes, Professor Fernandez, we know about your request, and we are going to make a decision, and you're going to be very happy about the decision. This is in November of 2013. In December, I call them and I'm like, yo, I'm writing a book. I need this information. And they're like, yeah, we're going to make a decision very soon. You're going to be very satisfied. In April, 6 months later, almost, they write me a snarky letter telling me that they are going to dismiss my case on a technicality. After 10 years of back and forth letter writing, I am pissed. I'm just pissed. I'm just pissed. So I literally borrow money, hire a lawyer, and sue them for their failure to release these records to me. And I was just angry. I was just like, these bastards, these fucking bastards, do they know who I am? I'm a professor writing a book. And by law, I was just pissed off. Immediately, the New York Times emails me. Everybody because I'm the first person to sue the cops since the Handschu case was resolved, to challenge them for their failure to do what a judge asked them to do, which is to register these million files, including those of Malcolm X, with the Municipal Archive of the City of New York.
Right.
I'm in court for 2 years. So that's covered in the New York Times. The suit is filed, and I'm a historian, so I kind of know, I should have known that once you sue, you're part of the historical record, right? There's all this formality. It's a long process, documents, but I wasn't ready for this. I was just pissed, and I was just being a kid from the Bronx. Fuck you, and the course you wrote in on. Cops. So 2 years later, the judge dismisses the case because she's like, we've asked the cops to do everything. And I've been in court for 2 years listening. She was on my side, clearly. She asked them to photograph everywhere they had looked for the files. She had them write sworn testimonies saying that they had looked for the files. And she's like, I don't know what else to do. We've been at this for 2 years. I've asked them to go look and photograph and sign sworn statements and nothing. I'm dismissing your case on a technicality. I'm dismissing your case because there's just we got to believe what they tell us. We walk out of the courtroom. It was a devastating and very emotional process being in the courtroom with cops and their lawyers. My lawyer turns to me and says, Professor Fernandez, we tried. And I'm like, we tried? No, we're going to get these records. So he says, well, why don't we go to New York One? New York One is the local 24-hour-a-day news station in New York.
Right.
We go to New York One. I'm interviewed by one of the top guy who was previously in the Bronx, but he's now like the big man at New York One. Dean Meminger is his name. I always forget his name. Dean Meminger interviews me. And I think Felipe might have been part of that too at that point. We called Felipe in to talk about, we called Felipe in after they were, but let me tell you what happened. Okay. So I'm leaving to the Dominican Republic. I'm like literally do this interview on my way to the Dominican Republic. He says, as I'm leaving, oh, Professor Fernandez, the cops are actually having a press conference right now. I'm going to go ask them about these files. When I get to the Dominican Republic, my phone is ringing off the hook. Dean Meminger has gone to the press conference, cross-examined the cops, and the cops are put, on the defensive. This is also the beginning of Black Lives Matter. The Ferguson uprising.
Right.
So the head of the police says, oh, we're not trying to keep these records from the professor. Let me look into it. 2 weeks later, their lawyers call my lawyer, and I'm asked to go into the Municipal Archive of the City of New York to identify the papers. And there they are, over 1 million surveillance records, including those of Malcolm X.
Wow.
So that's an incredible story. But of course, the cops are a vindictive bunch. So they purged the Young Lord's papers. And we know because there's a very complicated system of record keeping that suggests that there are plenty of Young Lord's papers that disappeared. The Black Panther papers are there and not the Young Lord's papers. Right.
That shit's crazy. It sounds like a movie waiting to happen.
Oh, absolutely.
But
so those are the surveillance records. I mean, I could say more. There is a lot more drama because I immediately looked at these files and they are so rich. And I was like, oh my God, maybe I should steal one of these flyers because there are 2 of them here. Mm-hmm. And then of course, the historian in me came tumbling down, hitting me over the head. I felt horrifically guilty. And I thought, if I'm saying this, these records are going to fly the hell out of here. If they're because this library is not really equipped to handle these papers and protect them. So I literally walked into, I can't really speak on this, but I tried like hell to preserve the papers and got an enormous amount of money to do it. And some folks in charge said thank you, but no thank you.
Wow.
A lot of money. So, this was, it's the police involved. So they're the final arbiters in this society.
It's crazy. Just this whole surveillance piece altogether reminds me of and how you said they were rounding folks up. Reminds me of the Palmer raids back in
Right.
1916, 1917s. It's like
Right,
the same
right.
shit,
Exactly.
same playbook over and over again. It's like they
Right.
don't even switch up. You know what I mean?
Right. No, exactly.
Yeah.
It's the same playbook. Actually, yes, it was after the Palmer raids that the litigation around First Amendment began in the 1920s.
Absolutely. And of course, the great J. Edgar Hoover, that piece of shit, was involved. That was his early years. You know what I mean?
The same bastard. Yep.
Creating the index files back then. That's how he got started. But it's wild. Just like I mean, their shit is so arrogant and so. I mean, it's like generation to generation. No one's gonna do anything about it. This is our Bible of counterinsurgency, and this is what we're going to use, and we're going to keep on using it because no one's going to stop us. No one's even going to make the connection. You know what I mean? It's just going to, and they'll keep on using it until it's over.
Right. Until they're challenged and brought out on the carpet.
No doubt. So what's next, Johanna Fernandez? What are we expecting?
So my book has won 1,000,001 awards, and I am proud and just honored. I put an enormous amount of work into this project over many, many years. I'm grateful to the Young Lords because they entrusted me with this history. That 60s radicals live with trauma. The trauma that was deployed against them by the state, by the counterintelligence program of the FBI. And so they don't, especially the Young Lords, it wasn't easy to get them to bear their stories, their lives, right? This is the defining moment of their lives in politically, at least, right? The organization went down like the Titanic because of infiltration and just the handiwork of the FBI. So I'm just grateful that they entrusted me with this incredible epic story. And part of what I discovered is that the Young Lords is one of the most successful organizations of the 60s in terms of the radical reforms they won. And it's important to say that even though the Young Lords were surveilled and disrupted by the counterintelligence program of the FBI, they were not, there was not a homicidal campaign deployed against them as we saw with the Black Panther Party. So that means that in many ways, the Young Lords, they literally stepped into a vacuum, an organizing vacuum left by the Black Panther Party, and many Black Panthers joined the Young Lords in New York. So it's an incredible story. What's next is that I'm going to figure out what to do with those 1,000,000 surveillance records. I mean, I'm going to go in and assess them and figure out what it means for American democracy and radical organizing And surveillance, because most people think that surveillance is a federal project. No.
Right.
Surveillance is a local operation. You can't do it without the cops.
Yeah. And I'm glad you're saying that because of the fact that, units like Bossy out there with Gene Roberts, who would not only infiltrated Malcolm X's organization, but he infiltrated the Panther 21, the Black Panther Party as well. You know what I mean? So you had, again, going back to the whole playbook, you had career pigs, undercover pigs, these pieces of shit who would betray their own community.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? You have to be the worst kind of piece of shit. And that's as mild as I could put it. You know what I mean? The worst type to betray your people and to fight to bring them down, to participate in the assassination, the execution, and the enslavement, the captivity. There are folks that are still locked up from some of this shit, some of these fucking parasites who have been long gone. I mean, a lot of them are dead and gone. But you have folks, from the East Coast to the West Coast, the Midwest, the whole nine, who are still captive. You know what I mean? You have folks who are still in exile from their handiwork. You know what I mean? So definitely salute to you for your work and the Young Lords for entrusting you with that process, because of the fact that I agree when it comes to a lot of our OGs from the 60s and beyond. I mean, it's hard to trust folks. I mean, shit, I came around in 1970. It's hard for me to trust some of these new motherfuckers now. Right. You know what I mean? So I can only imagine going through the things that they've gone through. Many of them who've done like Sekou, 33, 34 years. You know what I'm saying? Those who didn't make it out, the Hugo Yogi Pinnells on the West Coast, and so many others that suffered and lost their families and lost their lives and just, I don't even want to call it tragedy because of the fact it's really not tragic. It was an onslaught. You know what I mean? It was an attack. It was genocide in another fashion and form. It was gentrification before the word. So definitely salute to you for your work. I'm looking for this next book. Everybody should go out and get this Young Lord book. What is the correct title for it?
The title of the book is The Young Lords, A Radical History. And it's a history of the Young Lords, but it's also a history of the urban crisis, deindustrialization in urban centers, and the ways in which it disfigures Black American and Puerto Rican communities in cities like New York, Chicago. It's also about the 60s and the revolutionary ideas of the period and how they came into being. This was a moment of wars and revolutions against European colonial rule. The writings of Frantz Fanon, of Che Guevara, of the Cuban Revolution, of the Algerian Revolution. That's really the backbone of the book. It's a book about Chicago and New York, but it's also a book about a country and a world in the throes of radical struggle. So I also want to mention the names of some people like Chacha Jimenez, who's without Chacha Jimenez, you don't have the Young Lords, right? As a revolutionary organization. Juan Gonzalez is one of the members of the organization. He's co-host with Amy Goodman of Democracy Now! He's part of the Central Committee. Denise Oliver was the first woman in the leadership body, in the formal leadership body of the organization. She's also Black American. Felipe Luciano, Mickey Melendez was one of the critical founders of the organization. And there are others. Iris Morales is another important figure, many others. But I just want to mention
Che Nieves and some of
Che
these
Nieves,
other,
Che Nieves in Attica.
no
Yeah,
doubt.
the young lords were identified by the prisoners in Attica as one of the negotiators in the crisis. They did an enormous amount of work around abolition and mass incarceration because one of their own was killed in the Tombs.
Indeed. Indeed.
It's which is the prison in New York City. In any case, I just wanted to just mention some of those folks, and thank you for this. I don't know if I answered your question, but
Nah, you definitely did. The book is available where? Where can they pick it up?
Folks can pick it up at the University of North Carolina Press,
Okay.
UNC Press. And I can send you a code so they can get it
Okay. We'll put the link in the bio.
Yeah, link in the bio.
In the bio.
UNC Press, but it's everywhere. But if you type Johanna Fernandez or even the Young Lords, A Radical History, it'll come up.
No doubt. We appreciate you for coming on. Black Power Media is the platform for all freedom fighters. You know what I mean? Especially those who came before us and folks like yourself. So anytime you got any news you want to bring across, let us know and we'll make it happen.
Thank you so very much. And what we can learn from the 60s and the Black Panthers and the Young Lords is that they identified a strategy for liberation and a strategy of change. Whether they were right or wrong, they understood that strategy was critical to victory. And we need a little of that.
Without a doubt. No doubt. Stay on point. We'll catch you soon. Be safe out there.
Thank you.
You're listening to Riot Starter TV. That was Johanna Fernandez, author, professor, freedom fighter. We appreciate her coming on and joining us. And, stay tuned to Black Power Media for that hardcore revolutionary fervor that you're looking for. And, Riot Starter TV, we out of here. Be safe out there. Ready for revolution.